The studio lights hit his face like a spotlight in a courtroom. Bill Maher leaned forward in his chair.
Of course, we should ban kitty and libel and personal threats and calls for insurrection. That's a no-brainer because they're already illegal. Just as it would be illegal in an...
Eyes sharp, voice calm. But there was something electric in the air. It wasn't just another episode. It was a showdown. An unfiltered, no-holds-barred clash that would leave the internet divided for days. People say Maher has mellowed with age, but that night, he came swinging. Cameras rolled as the audience held their breath. It started with one guest's smug remark about protecting truth. And before anyone could blink, Maher fired back with the kind of brutal honesty that can burn bridges on live TV. Gasps echoed through the studio. Producers whispered off camera. Social media lit up within minutes. Maher destroys the woke left started trending before the segment was even over. Viewers couldn't believe what they were seeing. A lifelong liberal...
And I don't completely believe any of it. Not right away, not until I check it out. And when I ask, is it true? Usually the answer turns out to be, well, sort of. Or yes, but yeah. See, we've all become very adept at saying things that are technically true but lack context, or that leave out half the story. So if we're gonna ban untruth, does that include the half-truth, the quarter-truth? And wait, don't the wokest people in the world believe that what really matters?
Liberal tearing into his own side with surgical precision. So who decides what the truth is? He asked, voice rising just enough to sting. The silence that followed was louder than applause. From there, everything spiraled. Accusations flew, egos cracked, and friendships that once defined Hollywood's liberal elite began to crumble. By the end of the night, even Maher himself looked shaken, as if he'd just set off a political explosion he couldn't contain. Any other Friday night on the show, the laughter, the applause, the faint buzz of audience chatter before the lights dimmed. But beneath the usual charm and political banter, something felt different. Bill Maher wasn't smiling the way he usually did before delivering a punchline. His gaze lingered on his guests. Two political commentators known for their fiery takes, and one social media activist whose followers treated her words like gospel. The air grew thick as the topic shifted from free...
Of course, we should ban kitty libel and personal threats and calls for insurrection. That's a no-brainer because they're already illegal. Just as it would be illegal in an actual town...
free speech to what they called truth policing. At first, it sounded like a regular debate. Words about misinformation, accountability, and social responsibility. But then came the spark that set the fire. The activist leaned forward, confident, her tone sharp and practiced. The problem is people think all opinions deserve a platform, she said. But some speech is harmful. Some truth needs guidance. Maher blinked slowly, as if trying to decide whether to laugh or let the silence hang. Instead, he leaned in, his voice quiet but heavy with weight. So who decides that? You? The question hit like a slap. The audience chuckled awkwardly, unsure if it was still a joke. Her smile faltered. Well, not me personally, she replied. But the collective good. Society needs protection from dangerous ideas. Maher's expression didn't soften. You mean ideas that make you uncomfortable? He shot back. His co-hosts shifted uneasily in their seats. Even the crew behind the cameras exchanged glances. It was supposed to be a calm discussion about digital ethics, but it turned into a moral courtroom where everyone was both the judge and the accused. Activist tried to deflect, insisting that truth was under attack and platforms must protect people from lies. Maher interrupted. Protect people or protect power? That line cracked open the dam. The audience gasped. Someone in the back clapped, and suddenly, social media feeds exploded with live reactions. Clips spread within minutes. Users posting captions like Maher just called out his own side, and he's done being polite. As the cameras kept rolling, the tension sharpened. Another guest, a political analyst known for defending progressive ideals, tried to cool things down. Bill, he said, you've built a career on nuance, but we can't deny that misinformation kills. Maybe a little control is necessary. Maher leaned back, his eyes never leaving the man's face. Control always starts as necessary, he replied softly. Then it becomes habit. Then it becomes law. There was no applause this time, only silence. The kind that makes people question if they're witnessing a debate or the start of something far bigger. Off stage, producers whispered frantically. They weren't sure whether to cut to commercial or let it play out. The director decided to keep rolling. Controversy meant ratings, and ratings meant survival. But the mood had shifted. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It was confession. The activist's voice trembled as she spoke again. "You're twisting it," she said, trying to steady herself. "We're talking about stopping hate, not censoring opinions." Maher shook his head. "Hate doesn't disappear because you delete it. It just hides until it's louder, inner, heavy, unanswerable." The audience, once divided between applause and groans, now sat frozen, their eyes darting between the guests as though watching a slow-motion car crash. Even the warm studio lights felt harsher, turning the stage into an interrogation room. Outside the studio, news alerts began popping up. Entertainment sites framed it as Bill Maher clashes with woke guest in explosive segment. Opinion pages began forming drafts before the episode even finished airing. Within minutes, Twitter threads formed armies. Some praised Maher as the last voice of sanity. Others accused him of betraying his base. By the end of the segment, the activist's confident demeanor had fractured. She stumbled through her closing remarks, her voice thin under the weight of Maher's relentless calm. "You're missing the point," she said weakly. "No," Maher replied. "You're proving it." The audience burst into nervous applause as the show cut to break, but the sound carried no joy, only shock. When the lights dimmed and the cameras stopped, the guests avoided eye contact. Maher stayed seated, his fingers tapping the desk, lost in thought. The activist stormed off first, her mic still live as she muttered something about platforming privilege. The producer rushed after her, trying to calm her down before she reached the press outside. The analyst followed, sighing, already picturing the headlines. Maher remained alone.
Recipe for mass deception.
Someone knows of a story that more effectively captures what's wrong with today's journalism than the sad saga of what happened last week at the Washington Post. They need to keep it to themselves because it would be too depressing. If you missed it, the Washington Post recently got embroiled in a self-inflicted shitstorm when one of their best reporters, David Weigel, retweeted this joke. "Every girl is bi. You just have to figure out if it's polar or..." Proving it is a joke. Thank you. The comedian who actually wrote the tweet called it a banal throwaway joke, which is exactly what it is. Throwaway, as in if you don't like it, throw it away. For eons, both sexes have made jokes about how the other is crazy, and no one but the perpetually offended thinks it means anything more than that the sexes get frustrated over how differently we each see the world. And yes, we relieve some of that frustration with humor. And
staring at the blinking red light of the camera that was no longer recording, as if the argument had drained something real out of him. Within an hour, clips from the show flooded social media. Influencers dissected every word. Fans were shocked. Some called it bravery, others betrayal. A few said Maher had finally crossed a line he could never return from. But for Maher, it wasn't about sides anymore. It was about the moment he realized that truth itself had become a team sport, and he refused to play. Meanwhile, the network boardroom buzzed with chaos. Phone lines rang non-stop, advertisers panicked, and executives scrambled to craft statements that sounded neutral yet apologetic. One executive muttered, "Why couldn't he just stick to jokes?" But deep down, they knew controversy was the currency that kept the show alive. Overnight, the internet turned into a battlefield. Hashtags trended, debates raged, and former allies clashed publicly. Celebrities chimed in, some praising Maher for saying what others were too afraid to, while others condemned him as a relic from a less progressive era. It wasn't just another talk show segment anymore. It had become a cultural fault line, one that split families, friendships, and fan bases right down the middle. As dawn broke, reporters camped outside Maher's home, microphones pointed like bayonets, flashing cameras capturing every glance, every smirk, every silence. His neighbors peeked through curtains, whispering that maybe he'd gone too far this time. But Maher didn't speak. He just nodded politely, waved once, and went back inside. Inside, his phone buzzed endlessly. Calls from friends, colleagues, and strangers who suddenly wanted to pick a side. The storm had only just begun, and somewhere in that silence, Maher knew he'd lit a fuse that wouldn't burn out quietly. The next morning, the world woke up divided. News anchors replayed the clip on a loop, each with their own spin. One network called it a bold stand for free speech. Another labeled it an unhinged rant that betrayed progressive values. Talk shows dissected every word like it was a political prophecy. Memes flooded social media. Some showed Maher as a gladiator in an arena. Others painted him as a fallen hero who'd finally turned on his own tribe. The chaos was loud, relentless, and strangely addictive. Inside the studio, the atmosphere was nothing short of panic. Producers huddled in corners, whispering about damage control. One assistant scrolled through comments with trembling hands, reading out loud, "Fans are furious. Half are threatening to boycott. Half are calling him a legend." The head producer rubbed his temples and muttered, "We're trending in 12 countries. That's either genius or disaster." The team knew Maher had crossed a line, but they couldn't agree on which one. By noon, the activist who'd clashed with Maher went live on her own social platform, her face pale and eyes still fiery. "What happened last night wasn't a debate," she said, voice shaking just enough to sound both angry and wounded. "It was a public ambush, a deliberate attempt to humiliate me and silence the truth." Millions tuned in instantly. Comments poured in, some showering her with sympathy, others mocking her as proof of the problem. She insisted Maher had twisted her words and used the platform to promote anti-progressive narratives. Her followers rallied, creating hashtags demanding an apology. Within hours, celebrities joined the storm. A few posted long captions about accountability and empathy. Others defended Maher, saying he simply said what everyone was thinking. Comedians especially sided with him, arguing that cancel culture has gone too far. The debate spilled from newsrooms into living rooms. Families argued over breakfast. Group chats exploded. Old college friends unfollowed each other. Everyone had an opinion, and everyone wanted to be right. In the middle of it all, Maher stayed quiet. He didn't release a statement, didn't tweet, didn't call into any shows, but those close to him said he wasn't unaffected. One friend revealed that he'd barely slept, pacing his house and replaying the segment over and over. "He knows what he said hit a nerve," the friend whispered, "but he also knows he meant every word." That night, a private dinner was held at a Hollywood restaurant known for its discreet clientele. The guest list included producers, political insiders, and two of Maher's closest confidants. Whispers filled the dimly lit room. One producer leaned in and said, "The sponsors want reassurance. They don't want to be tied to controversy." Another replied, "You can't silence Bill. That's his brand." Maher sat at the end of the table, silent, staring into his drink as the argument swirled around him. Finally he spoke. "If telling the truth costs me sponsors," he said softly, "then maybe I've been selling the wrong thing." The table went silent. No one dared to respond. That one line would later leak online, igniting another wave of headlines. Interview. 6:44, 7:53. Meanwhile, the activist team was busy drafting a statement of their own. Their lawyers debated whether to pursue a complaint against the network, arguing emotional distress and public misrepresentation. Screenshots of private messages began circulating, allegedly showing her venting about Maher long before the show. Whether real or fabricated, they added fuel to the fire. The internet doesn't wait for proof. It just chooses sides. As the weekend rolled on, the controversy evolved into something bigger. Pundits called it the new culture war, with Maher at the center. The term truth policing became a trending topic, sparking heated threads that blurred the lines between fact and fiction. Clips of the confrontation were now edited with dramatic music, posted by channels chasing views and outrage. Each version told a different story. One painted Maher as a hero of free speech, another as a manipulative showman exploiting outrage for ratings. On Sunday night, the network finally released a statement. It was short, careful, and frustratingly vague. "Our program encourages open dialogue and diverse opinions. We support healthy debate and remain committed to respectful discussion." It said nothing and everything at once. Commentators mocked it, saying it was the perfect corporate apology. So neutral, it offended everyone equally. Later that evening, Maher received a call from an old friend, a journalist who'd once been fired over a controversial article. "You know you've started something you can't stop," the journalist said quietly. Maher exhaled. Maybe it's about time someone did. But not everyone agreed. One of his longtime producers, a man who had been with him since the early seasons, warned him that this time the backlash might not fade. "They're coming for you, Bill," he said. "Not just online, networks, advertisers, even your guests. They're scared." Maher simply smiled, a tired kind of smile that comes from knowing you've already stepped too far to turn back. "Let them be scared," he replied. "Maybe fear will finally make them think." That same night, paparazzi photos of Maher walking alone hit the tabloids. The captions painted him as defiant, haunted, or both. One headline read, "Bill Maher seen leaving restaurant alone," Friends say he's preparing for war. And in a way, he was, because what started as a television argument had turned into something far more personal. It wasn't just about ideology anymore. It was about the cost of speaking your mind in a world where silence was safer. And deep down, Maher knew this was no longer about television ratings. It was about legacy, what he would be remembered for when the noise finally died down. Monday morning came with an eerie calm. The streets outside the studio looked the same, but inside, everything felt different. The security team had doubled in size. Phones buzzed without pause, and the air carried the kind of tension that only comes when people know a storm isn't over. Maher arrived early, dressed in his usual quiet defiance, clutching a coffee cup like a shield. As he walked through the halls, conversations hushed, glances darted. Some staff nodded respectfully, others looked away, afraid of being caught on the wrong side of whatever line had just been drawn. By noon, the new episode's pre-meeting began, but it didn't feel like work. It felt like damage control disguised as routine. The network's legal advisor was there this time, something that almost never happened. She cleared her throat before speaking, her voice cautious, almost rehearsed. "Bill," she began, "the backlash is escalating. Sponsors are reconsidering contracts. Social media is out of control. Maybe we can issue a clarification? Something to soften it." Maher leaned back in his chair, swirling the last sip of coffee, eyes fixed on the lawyer. "Soften the truth?" he said quietly. "That's what got us here." The producer beside him sighed, rubbing his forehead. "We're not asking you to backtrack, Bill, just reframe it. Say you respect differing views, that it was all about promoting discussion." Maher smiled faintly. That's exactly what it was about. They just didn't like the discussion part. A tense silence followed. Then, without warning, one of the younger staffers blurted out, "People think you've turned into the enemy." Maher didn't react. Instead, he looked at her with a kind of calm curiosity. Then maybe they should ask themselves why hearing a question feels like an attack. The room went still. Even the hum of the air conditioner felt louder. The meeting ended without decisions, just nervous glances and mumbled goodbyes. That evening, the activist appeared on a primetime news show. Her voice composed, but her eyes burning with vindication. "This isn't about one argument," she told the host. "It's about a culture that rewards provocation over progress." She accused Maher of exploiting her words for ratings, calling his segment a deliberate act of intellectual bullying. The host nodded solemnly, feeding the fire with questions about accountability. Clips of her interview went viral within hours. But something unexpected happened. A small but growing number of viewers began pushing back. People from across the political spectrum posted messages saying they didn't agree with everything Maher said, but they believed he had a right to say it. Independent journalists released videos dissecting the original episode, showing how the conversation had been edited and twisted online to appear harsher than it was. Suddenly, the narrative began to fracture. The outrage machine that had been roaring for days started sputtering under its own contradictions. Still, the network executives couldn't ignore the chaos. A private emergency meeting was called. Someone suggested a temporary suspension to cool things down. Another executive slammed the table, arguing that suspending him would destroy the show's credibility. They fought for hours, their voices echoing through the soundproof walls. Finally, one of them muttered, "Bill's too big to cancel, but not too big to burn." Unaware of the meeting, Maher sat in his office, scrolling through old messages from fans. He stopped on one that read, "You made me believe honesty still mattered." For a moment, he smiled. Then his phone rang. It was an unknown number. He hesitated before answering. A familiar voice came through, low and steady. It was the journalist who'd been fired years ago, the same one who'd warned him earlier. "They're not going to forgive you this time," the journalist said. "They'll smile on camera, but behind the scenes they're sharpening knives." Maher chuckled softly. "I've been stabbed before. This time, I'm just not bleeding for free." Later that night, he returned to the studio to prep for the next episode. But before recording began, one of the crew members approached him. "Sir," the man said nervously, "some guests canceled. They don't want to appear with you right now." Maher nodded, not surprised. "Then find people who do," he replied. "And if no one wants to, I'll talk to the camera myself." The next episode aired with a noticeably different tone. There was no panel, no laughter, no audience cheers. Just Maher sitting alone at his desk, speaking directly into the camera. "Everyone's asking for clarification," he began. "So here it is. My point wasn't to attack anyone. It was to ask a question. Who gets to define truth? And who gets to decide which version of it we're allowed to say out loud?" His voice was steady, almost mournful. "We've reached a point where people don't just fear lies. They fear inconvenient facts. We claim to love diversity, but not the kind that challenges us. Social media went wild again, but this time it was different. The clip was raw, uncut, and impossible to twist. Even his critics admitted it was powerful. Comments flooded in. This is what debate should sound like. He's risking everything to say what others won't. Journalists called it a comeback moment, while activists accused him of playing the victim. But behind that speech was a deeper truth Maher hadn't shared publicly. He'd received threats, some from strangers, others disguised as professional warnings. Sponsors had quietly backed out, leaving contracts in limbo. Friends who once called him fearless now avoided his texts. It was a lonely kind of victory, the kind that costs more than applause could repay. That night, sitting on his porch under a sky smeared with city lights, Maher replayed the entire week in his mind. The words, the arguments, the silence that followed. For years, he'd prided himself on being the last bridge between reason and chaos. But now he wasn't sure if that bridge still stood, or if he'd already burned it himself. He looked out at the city and whispered, "Maybe it's not about sides anymore. Maybe it's about who's still willing to listen." The wind carried his words away, but somewhere, across screens and timelines, people were still watching, still arguing, still caring. And for Maher, that meant he wasn't done yet. By Tuesday morning, it was everywhere. Bill Maher's solo monologue had ignited something no one expected. A strange blend of admiration and outrage that spilled into every corner of the internet. Millions of viewers replayed the clip in silence, trying to decide if he was a rebel for free speech or a traitor to his own tribe. Newsrooms couldn't stop talking about it. Even late-night hosts, once his allies, started throwing subtle jabs, mocking his truth crusade. The irony was impossible to miss. The man who'd spent decades defending open dialogue was now being mocked for daring to use it. The network offices turned into war rooms. Marketing teams argued over whether to lean into the controversy or distance from it. Publicists drafted press statements only to tear them up minutes later. One executive shouted, "He's polarizing the entire channel," to which another replied, "And doubling our ratings, don't act like you're not loving it." Every decision was a gamble now, and everyone knew it. That evening, Maher received a call from someone unexpected, the activist herself. Her voice was calmer than before, stripped of the performance that had fueled her earlier statements. "Bill," she began, "I didn't call to fight." He paused, suspicious. "Then why'd you call?" "Because I've been thinking," she said softly, "about what you said that night. Maybe I reacted too fast. Maybe I didn't want to hear what you meant." Maher stayed silent, letting her words hang in the air. "Look," she continued, "you weren't wrong about everything, but you also don't know what it's like to be on the other side of this. To have people weaponize speech against you, mock you, threaten you. It changes how you see the world," he exhaled slowly. "And you don't know what it's like to have people tell you which truths are allowed. That changes you too." For a brief moment, there was understanding. Two people who had torn each other apart on national television, now sharing a quiet truce that no one would ever see. But before either could say more, she ended the call. The silence afterward felt heavier than any applause. The next day, tabloids ran with new headlines. Private reconciliation? Sources say Maher and activists spoke off record. Fans speculated endlessly, while both sides denied giving details. But what mattered most wasn't the gossip. It was the shift. People were starting to talk again, not just shout. The debate had opened cracks in the wall of silence that had divided them. Meanwhile, the network planned a special live broadcast, a roundtable featuring Maher, his critics, and several high-profile guests. It was risky, unpredictable, and exactly the kind of chaos the audience craved. When the night arrived, the studio was packed. The energy was tense, electric, like the first drop before a storm. Maher walked on stage to mixed applause, half cheers, half jeers. He greeted the audience with his usual smirk, but his eyes gave away the exhaustion behind it. "Let's try something crazy tonight," he said. "Let's talk. Not tweet, not cancel, just talk." The panel began civilly enough, with polite exchanges about freedom of speech and digital ethics, but it didn't stay that way. Midway through, a guest accused Maher of fueling division under the guise of honesty. Maher didn't raise his voice. Instead, he leaned forward and said, "Division doesn't come from honesty. It comes from pretending everyone agrees when they don't." The audience erupted, some cheering, some booing. One of the commentators slammed his fist on the table. "You think you're the only one who cares about truth?" he shouted. "You're just performing rebellion!" Maher laughed, not cruelly, but with the weariness of someone who'd heard it all before. "Maybe," he said, "but at least I'm performing it in the open." And just like that, the tension broke. The room filled with overlapping voices, passionate and raw. For the first time in days, it wasn't about sides. It was about ideas, colliding in real time. There were no hashtags, no scripts, just people arguing, thinking, reacting. It was messy, uncomfortable, and utterly human. When the broadcast ended, the audience gave a standing ovation. Not because they agreed, but because they'd witnessed something rare. A real conversation. As the credits rolled, Maher stayed seated, eyes distant, a faint smile ghosting across his face. Afterward, outside the studio, fans and critics stood together, still debating but laughing between sentences. Reporters shouted questions, flashes popped, and someone yelled, "Bill, what now?" He looked over, half amused. "Now," he said, "now we let the truth speak for itself." That night, in his dressing room, he sat alone again, scrolling through the flood of reactions. Thousands of messages, some full of love, others dripping with hate, but one stood out. It read, "You reminded us that conversation isn't the enemy, silence is." He read it twice, set his phone down, and looked at his reflection. The same tired eyes, the same quiet smirk, but something had changed. He wasn't just hosting a show anymore. He'd started something he couldn't control, and maybe that was the point. By the time the sun rose over Los Angeles, the headlines had shifted. Instead of outrage, there was curiosity. Instead of condemnation, conversation. The world hadn't changed overnight, but something had cracked open. Something raw, honest, and necessary. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Bill Maher sat on his porch again, coffee in hand, watching the city wake up. The noise was still there. The chaos, the endless arguing. But for the first time, it sounded less like a war and more like a dialogue. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. And as the debate still echoes across every corner of the internet, one question lingers. Did Bill Maher cross a line? Or did he finally draw one that needed to be drawn? Fans are still arguing, networks are still spinning, and nobody seems ready to stop talking. But maybe that's the real takeaway here. Maybe truth isn't supposed to make everyone comfortable. Maybe it's supposed to make us think, even if it hurts a little. What do you think? Was Maher standing up for free speech or stirring the pot just to stay relevant? We want to hear your take. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell us which side you believe got it right, and whether the age of open debate is truly dead or just getting started. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the drama, hit that like button right now and make sure you're subscribed for more stories that peel back the curtain on politics, media, and the culture wars shaping our world. Turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Because in times like these, every conversation counts. Thanks for watching. Stay curious, and we'll see you in the next video. Stay curious, and we'll see you in the next video.